Welcome to Rad Flicks 1990. My name is Joe. These are just opinions. I am Joepinionated. What is a rad flick? A rad flick is a movie that has stood the test of time. So, raddest comedy for 1990, 9 finalists. First finalist is Problem Child, starring Michael Oliver and John Ritter, directed by Dennis Dugan. Pretty big movie for me when I was a kid, total brat kid. Opportunity Knocks, starring Dana Carvey, directed by Donald Petrie, small time crook, going door to door. He's basically Dana Carvey, ends up living the life of the rich and famous, kind of walks into a situation, one of those movies. Malcolm Blower is number one. Next finalist, Raddest Comedy 1990, goes to The Freshman, starring Marlon Brando and Matthew Broderick, directed by Andrew Bergman. This guy that starts dating this girl, and her dad is Marlon Brando, playing basically the character of Don Corleone. Matthew Broderick knows about the movie, and everybody's just kind of like, yeah, but don't say anything, because he's definitely a bad dude in this show. Next up, directed by Jonathan Lynn, starring Robbie Coltrane and Eric Idle, Nuns on the Run. This movie also had a lot of buzz, really funny movie at the time. Two small-time crooks, Brian and Charlie, dress up like nuns to escape from a mob boss that wants them dead. Next finalist, Raddest Comedy 1990, goes to director John Waters, starring Amy Locane and Johnny Depp. The movie is Crybaby. This movie is set in the 50s. It's about this romance between Allison, who's this good girl, and Crybaby, a rebellious drape with a heart of gold. Their love defies social norms and invokes a clash between rival gangs. Next finalist from 1990, Dick Tracy, starring everybody under the sun, Al Pacino, Madonna, Warren Beatty, and directed by Warren Beatty, based on a classic comic strip. Next up, borderline comedy here, Gremlins 2, The New Batch, directed by Joe Dante. Okay, he directed Burbs earlier, starring Zach Galligan and Phoebe Cates. A little bit more along the lines of Army of Darkness, Evil Dead, that sort of thing. Next up, finalist goes to Home Alone, directed by Chris Columbus, starring Catherine O'Hara, Joe Pesci, Macaulay Culkin. We've mentioned this one quite a few times. Christmas movie marathon, John Hughes list. Today on the Joepinionated List movie edition, I'm counting down top 10 movies from legendary director and writer John Hughes. I've done Chris Columbus lists. The McAllisters go on vacation. They leave Kevin home alone. Next up, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, directed by Steve Barron, starring Judith Hoag, the Ninja Turtles. I think Corey Feldman's one of the Ninja Turtles. Michelangelo, right? Ninja Turtles is based on a comic book. There was a cartoon lining up down the street to watch the debut. I remember the poster with the turtles peeking out of the sewer. Just that poster alone was just like, wow, this is going to be incredible. Ninja Turtles was the biggest thing in the world for probably the whole year. And the winner for Raddest Comedy of 1990 goes to The Freshman, starring Marlon Brando and Matthew Broderick. What can I say? It's pretty hilarious. The Freshman, 1990. Runner-up goes to Crybaby. Freshman, directed by Andrew Bergman. Up next, Raddest Comedy. For Raddest Comedy, we have 8 finalists. Raddest Comedy 1991. In the comments below is a playlist of all the trailers mentioned in this episode. Let us know what your picks are for the categories if you've made it this far. First up, Raddest Comedy. The movie is Dutch, directed by Peter Feynman. It was written by John Hughes. It's a road trip movie starring Christopher McDonald, Jo Beth Williams, Ethan Embry, and Ed O'Neill. Love Ed O'Neill, and I love him in these dramatic roles. This is a great one. It's John Hughes. It's just like watching any other John Hughes road trip movie. It's great. It's easy watch. Next up, Father of the Bride, starring Martin Short, Kimberly Williams Paisley, Diane Keaton, and Steve Martin in Father of the Bride, directed by Charles Schreier, George Bonks, Martin Short, and Steve Martin. This is one of my favorites. Next finalist, Rad Flicks Comedy 1991 goes to Hot Shots. Charlie Sheen, Carrie Lewis, Valeria Gorlino, Lloyd Bridges, directed by Jim Abrams. Hilarious slapstick, similar to the Naked Gun spoof of Top Gun. Next up, finalist, director Frank Oz brings us What About Bob, starring Charlie Korsmo, Julie Haggerty, Richard Dreyfuss, and Bill Murray. It's about this guy, Bob Wiley, who follows his psychiatrist on a vacation, I think. Next up, directed by David Zucker. Next up is Naked Gun 2.5, The Smell of Fear. Leslie Nielsen, Priscilla Presley, George Kennedy, O.J. Simpson, David Zucker, Lieutenant Frank Drebin. I remember seeing this one, I'm pretty sure in a small theater on Salt Spring Island, in the church. I just remember people rolling in the aisles. Directed by Ate DeJong. Next up is Drop Dead Fred with Marsha Mason, Rick Mayall, Phoebe Cates, Tim Matheson. The last nominee for comedy, 1991 Raddest comedy, goes to The Addams Family, starring Raul Julia, Angelica Houston, Christopher Lloyd, and Christina Ricci. Directed by Barry Sonnenfeld. The Addams Family, based on the old TV show. And the winner of Raddest comedy of 1991 goes to What About Bob, starring Richard Dreyfuss and Bill Murray. Awesome comedy, family movie. What About Bob? Runner-up goes to Hot Shots, both certified rad. Next category, Raddest comedy. 1992. First up for Raddest comedy, 1992, directed by Sam Raimi, starring Bruce Campbell, Army of Darkness. Hilarious. This is my boomstick. First you love me, now you hate me. The whole trilogy is 10 out of 10. Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell. I love Bubba Hotep. I love anything these guys do together. Sign me up. Entertained start to finish. Up next, Raddest comedy 1992. It's in the stack behind me right there. My Cousin Vinny, starring Joe Pesci and Marissa Tomei, directed by Jonathan Lynn. Amazing movie. Ralph Macchio from Karate Kid as well. You want to get a good movie? Have you seen My Cousin Vinny? You're going to laugh. You're going to like this movie. It's great. Marissa Tomei won an Academy Award for this. Up next for Raddest comedy 1992. It's also behind me over there. Wayne's World, starring Mike Myers and Dana Carvey. Wayne's World, party time, excellent. Woo, 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 woo. One of the best comedies of all time. One of the best comedies of the 90s. One of the funniest movies ever made. Best transition from an SNL skit to a movie. Mike Myers, Dana Carvey. You get to elite, hilarious people. Sha Wing, Psycho Hose Beast. If she were a president, she'd be Abraham Lincoln. It's just so ahead of its time. Chris Farley. Are you mental? Queen, Bohemian Rhapsody. Next up, directed by Les Mayfield, starring Brendan Fraser and Sean Austin and Pauly Shore in Encino Man. Guy's digging out a pool in his backyard and he digs up Caveman. Encino Man. Next up, Raddest comedy again, directed by Robert Zemeckis. It's Death Becomes Her. And yeah, this is a funny movie. I don't really think it's so much suspense thriller. Death Becomes Her makes it into a category. Bruce Willis, Meryl Streep. Death Becomes Her. Next finalist, Home Alone 2, Lost in New York, Raddest comedy 1992, Joe Pesci, Macaulay Culkin, written by John Hughes, directed by Chris Columbus. Second one, not as perfect, still a Christmas classic, and love it. Check out my Christmas movie marathon, also on this channel. December 2nds are for sequels, and this is one of the greatest sequels in any Christmas franchise. Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. Got to watch Home Alone 2 on the 2nd. Playlist in the description for all the trailers mentioned in this episode. Check me out on Patreon, all that sort of stuff. Up next, directed by Ron Shelton, starring Woody Harrelson and Wesley Snipes and Rosie Perez in White Men Can't Jump. Billy and Sydney, two streetwise basketball hustlers, form a partnership to swindle people out of their money. Next up, directed by Robert Altman, The Player, Greta Scacchi, and Tim Robbins. Hollywood studio executive gets involved in a web of murder. Can't say I've ever seen it. Panel of normal people have voted into the finals for Raddest comedy. Up next, finalist for 1992 Raddest comedy goes to another Tim Robbins movie, and the movie is Bob Roberts. This one's directed by Tim Robbins. Mockumentary style satire about this guy Bob Roberts, charismatic folk singer, politician running for U.S. Senate. Finalist for Raddest comedy of 1992. Winner of Raddest comedy 1992 goes to this one, Wayne's World. Runner up going to My Cousin Vinny, and third place runner-up going to Army of Darkness. Next up, Raddest comedy 1993. The finalists, there's 10 of them. First up, Johnny Depp, Mary Stuart Masterson, starring Jeremiah Chechik's Benny and June. Don't think I ever saw that one, but we have a panel of normal people, so there's movies that'll get through that I haven't seen, and I'm not claiming to have seen every movie ever. Next finalist, starring Nancy Travis and Mike Myers, directed by Thomas Shalami. The movie is So I Married an Axe Murderer. Woman man. Whoa, man. Whoa, man. Heed paper. No. Shout out to the Jordan Van. I know he loved this movie. Next finalist goes to Groundhog Day, starring Andy McDowell and Bill Murray. Groundhog Day, directed by Harold Ramis. I guess him and Bill Murray had a falling out during the making of this movie and didn't even talk to each other towards the end of it. It's hard to imagine such a classic movie having such a humongous riff happen during this. Harold Ramis and Bill Murray, of course, have worked on plenty of movies before this. Next up is National Lampoon's Loaded Weapon. Samuel L. Jackson, Emilio Estevez, directed by Gene Quintana. Next up, starring Carla Gugino and Pauly Shore. The movie is Son-in-Law, directed by Steve Rash. So Pauly Shore had a string of great movies. He was the son of Mitzi Shore. She ran the comedy store in LA, Hollywood. There was a documentary about Pauly Shore later on too that was really great. Who is Pauly Shore? Or Pauly Shore is Dead or something like that. It was really great. Next finalist for Raddest Comedy 1993 goes to Wayne's World Part 2. Wayne's World 2, starring Dana Carvey and Mike Myers. This is the one where they try to do Wayne stock. Wayne has a dream, and Aerosmith will come, and Aerosmith shows up to Wayne stock. Next up for Raddest Comedy 1993 is Dazed and Confused, directed by Richard Linklater, starring Jason London, Wiley Wiggins, a whole slew of other kids, teenagers. First time that I watched this movie, I actually watched it 2.5 times in a row. Loved it. The last graduating class of the 70s. Some people think it doesn't age well. I think this movie gets better with age. I think it's a fantastic movie. One of the greatest coming of age comedies, dramas of all time. Incredible soundtrack too. Before I forget, I love the soundtrack. Have that on vinyl. Next up, Mrs. Doubtfire, starring Sally Field, starring Robin Williams, directed by Chris Columbus. So he's the guy that wrote The Goonies, wrote Gremlins, directed Home Alone, directed Harry Potter, directed Mrs. Doubtfire. I have an episode on this channel. If you want to learn more about Chris Columbus, I will be doing Robin Williams episodes in the future. I remember seeing this one 4 times in the theater. Up next, Raddest Comedy 1993, Grumpy Old Men, starring Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon, directed by Donald Petrie. Great supporting cast as well. Daryl Hannah, acting legends, Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau. And this is just one of those fun, easy to watch comedies. The winner, Raddest Comedy in 1993, goes to Groundhog Day, starring Bill Murray and Andy McDowell, directed by Harold Ramis. Hilarious, excellent movie. Runner-up for Raddest Comedy of 1993 goes to Wayne's World Part 2. Third place, it's So I Married an Axe Murderer, tied with Mrs. Doubtfire. Next category for Rad Flicks 1994 is comedy, and boy oh boy are there some doozies this year. 1994 is such an awesome year for movies. Such an awesome year for Rad Flicks. I just returned from a trip. It's located in Leonardo, New Jersey. Leonardo, like the Ninja Turtle, New Jersey. Went out of my way to make sure we went there, and it was fantastic. Great spot. Coastline of New Jersey. It's really cool. So Raddest Comedy. The finalists are Clerks, over my shoulder here. Director Kevin Smith. Starring Jeff Anderson, Brian O'Halloran, Jason Mewes, Kevin Smith, Silent Bob. I just love Kevin Smith movies. And this is the first one. The one that got it off the ground. 1994's Clerks. Jay and Silent Bob. All the characters in this movie are incredible. It's so realistic. 37 in a row. And I love how that guy starts to follow her. And shout out to Leonardo, New Jersey for being killer. Next nominee for Raddest Comedy goes to Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, starring Courtney Cox and Jim Carrey. Directed by Tom Shattuck. Alrighty then. Einhorn, Finkel. Everybody knew Jim Carrey from In Living Color, Fire Marshal Bill. Check out the Jim Carrey episode on this channel. Number 7 all time, Joepinionated List. Comes from 1994, and this is the one that really took Jim Carrey from comedian in Living Color to biggest comedian in the world.
The funniest guy in the world.
Ace Ventura from 1994. Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. Ace Ventura, one of the best comedies ever. He has 3 movies this year that are all over Rad Flicks. First one being Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. The second one being directed by the Farrelly brothers. The movie is Dumb and Dumber, co-starring Jeff Daniels and Cam Neely from the Boston Bruins. Probably the funniest movie I ever saw in the theater is either this one or Happy Gilmore. Maybe Team America World Police. I saw it on Boxing Day. Just couldn't believe how many people were in stitches from the start of the movie to the end of the movie. Harry and Lloyd Christmas, Swimmy, Swammy, Slippy, Slappy, Swanson, Dumb and Dumber, and Ace Ventura in the same year from Jim Carrey. Next up, the story of Stanley Ipkiss, directed by Chuck Russell, co-starring Cameron Diaz and Jim Carrey. The Mask. 3 blockbusters in his first major year of starring roles. Now I got crap. Check out my Jim Carrey episode on the channel. Spoiler alert though, The Mask did not make top 10 Jim Carrey roles for me. It's kind of a kids movie and Jim Carrey's got a lot of great roles. The Mask also finalist for Raddest Comedy of 1994. Till I'm getting old is like I know I saw this movie a few times and it had Ricky Lake in it. Serial Mom. I can't remember what it was about. The mom was a serial killer, I guess. Kathleen Turner, Sam Waterston, directed by John Waters. Serial Mom follows a seemingly perfect suburban housewife, Beverly Saltfin, who harbors a dark secret. She's a serial killer. Okay. And last, but certainly not least, for finalists, goes to Ed Wood. Starring Johnny Depp, Martin Landau, Bill Murray, Sarah Jessica Parker. Check out my episode on Tim Burton. Number 4 all-time Joepinionated List, greatest Tim Burton movies from 1994, Ed Wood. We love Tim Burton around here. I love Ed Wood. It's about the world's worst director based on a true story. Winner, Raddest Comedy, 1994 goes to Dumb and Dumber from the Farrelly brothers, Jeff Daniels, Jim Carrey. You sold a dead bird to a blind kid? So you're telling me there's a chance. One of the finest movies ever made. The Raddest Comedy of 1994, Dumb and Dumber. Runner-up, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, also from Jim Carrey. Third place is Clerks, which would finish first in many other years. Incredible year for movies, 1994. Dumb and Dumber, Ace Ventura, and Clerks, all in the same year. The next category for Rad Flicks 1995 is comedy. Raddest comedy or funniest movie of 1995. First finalist. It's directed by Tamra Davis. The movie is Billy Madison, starring Adam Sandler, Darren McGavin, Norm Macdonald. When this movie came out, it was summertime. I was staying on Salt Spring Island for the summer because I went to the video store to rent something. I can't remember what, but it wasn't in. And so I rented Billy Madison instead, brought it home, damn near wore out the tape before I brought it back 3 days late. The same story, honestly, Back to School, Rodney Dangerfield. I mean, similar story. So good. Steve Buscemi has a really great role in this. The pickle races, he stamped on a bag. He called the shit poop. Chris Farley in this movie too. And just like his whole bragging about getting with the teacher on the bus and O'Doyle rules. And there's just a million lines from this one. Next finalist for Raddest Comedy 1995, directed by Peter Siegel, starring David Spade and Chris Farley. The movie is Tommy Boy, Tommy Callahan, automotive parts producer, and he's forced into the family business.
David Spade and Chris Farley together. They played off each other so well.
Fat guy in a little coat was something that Chris used to always do to David Spade around the office in Saturday Night Live. Not up here so much or down here, but right here. Chris Farley, one of the funniest people in history, really. Next finalist for 1995, some really modern day classics here. This one starring John Candy and Alan Alda, Rhea Perlman, and this is actually directed by Michael Moore. The movie is Canadian Bacon. This one just plays on so many different Canadian stereotypes, starring John Candy, starring a slew of Canadians. Just a lot of cameos the whole way through. Kind of honestly reminds me a little bit of like Jay and Silent Bob a few years later. One hilarious scene after the other, only funnier with time. Next finalist, speaking of Jay and Silent Bob, the next finalist, directed by Kevin Smith, starring Jeremy London and Jason Lee in Mallrats. Two slackers spend a day at the mall. For me anyways, it's the magic eye. The guy in the mall trying to stare at the magic eye. I think that I saw Mallrats before I saw Clerks. Just this guy is super frustrated standing in front of a magic eye. And in the mid-90s and early 90s, magic eye were huge. Those things were.
I hated the magic eyes. Like, I could never see the magic eye. I'd be like taking so long and everyone would be like, oh my God, yeah, it's this. And I'm like, it's not working for me. I can't do the magic eye.
Next finalist for Rad Flicks Comedy 1995, directed by Amy Heckerling, starring Stacey Dash and Alicia Silverstone, Clueless.
And I think it had Paul Rudd in it. It was so much fun. These rich kids in Beverly Hills going to high school. If you have any preteen girls or teen girls that haven't seen this, watch it with them. They'll get a kick out of it.
Rolling with the homie. The final finalist goes to Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau in the sequel, and the movie is Grumpier Old Man, directed by Howard Deutsch.
We watched this so many times in our house. Anne Margaret.
Sophia Loren.
Yes, Sophia Loren. Oh, she's so beautiful.
Brooks Meredith. just kind of owned in these shows, just with his one-liners, the wish in one hand and crap in the other and see which fills first. The kid swallowed a quarter. Well, if she craps out 2 dimes and a nickel, then I'd be concerned. John Gustafson and Max Goldman were the name of the characters in that one. It's just a simple movie. It reminds me honestly of like Father of the Bride or something like that, just where it's
just a
easy
fun
to
movie.
watch family comedy. Winner of Raddest Comedy 1995 goes to Adam Sandler's Billy Madison. The second place for 1995 goes to Tommy Boy. Third place is a tie between Clueless and Mallrats. You're not the only female on this panel this time around. So next category, Raddest Comedy. First finalist for Raddest Comedy 1996, and there's 7 of them. First finalist directed by Ben Stiller, starring Matthew Broderick and Jim Carrey. It's The Cable Guy. It's a dark comedy. For me, The Cable Guy reminds me so much of when Jim Carrey went on Saturday Night Live to promote The Cable Guy. Probably my favorite episode of Saturday Night Live. Jim Carrey, huge star. So he's coming off of 1994. He made those Dumb and Dumber, The Mask, Ace Ventura, 1995, Batman Forever. Then The Cable Guy. This is a cult classic. I love this movie. For me, this movie is like a fine wine. It gets better with age. What are your thoughts, Carol?
Cable Guy. I have a friend and she's actually married to the cable guy that came to change her cable. Super funny, a bit of a thriller. Jim Carrey did such a good job. Like you'd kind of cringe for Jim Carrey in that movie.
Next Raddest Comedy from 1996 finalist, directed by Tom Shadyac, starring Jada Pinkett Smith, Dave Chappelle, Eddie Murphy. The movie is The Nutty Professor. Funny story, I was watching it tonight at dinner time. Eddie Murphy puts on a bunch of fat suits and plays the clumps, plays an entire family. Jerry Lewis classic, The Nutty Professor. What are your thoughts on this one?
Oh, this was such a cool movie with Eddie Murphy playing all those characters. Like, it was a big deal. Eddie, of course, super funny guy.
Next finalist, directed by Wes Anderson from 1996, starring Luke and Owen Wilson. The movie is Bottle Rocket, his first big feature film. He was roommates with Owen Wilson in university, became fast friends. This movie came out as a bit of a flop, but it gained this sort of underground cult following. I find this movie to be one of the most outright hilarious movies by Wes Anderson. One of my favorites. Check out my Wes Anderson list on this channel to see where Bottle Rocket finishes. Actually, I'll just show you right now. At number 5, I'm going with the movie Bottle Rocket from 1996. Next up, from the directors of Dumb and Dumber, the Farrelly brothers, their next movie starring Bill Murray and Woody Harrelson and Randy Quaid. The movie is Kingpin, bowling, 10-pin bowling. What is it about good sex that always makes me have to crap?
One of my favorite movies from this year. I love this movie, Kingpin. I mean, so funny.
Ernie McCracken. I love Bill Murray's comb over in this movie. I'd love to know, I'd love to watch like a behind the scenes thing on this. Just who came up with what. Must have been one of the funniest movies to be on a set. Dennis Quaid is just loopy. And with Woody Harrelson and Bill Murray. Next finalist from 1996, directed by Dennis Dugan, starring Christopher McDonald and Adam Sandler and Carl Weathers, rest in peace, as Chubbs Peterson. The movie is Happy Gilmore, about a hockey player starts playing golf to save his grandma's house.
Iconic movie. They're filming a second movie. Actually, it's just going into production now, and I can't wait to see it. I love this movie. Bob Barker's in this movie. I mean, love to see Bob Barker. Like, we all grew up watching The Price is Right, and it was a thing. Shooter McGavin.
Meet you on the 9th at 9. Why don't you get some hay? Live down by the bay. I just may. What do you say? You have to tap it in. Just tap it in. Kevin Nealon. I love Kevin Nealon in his series where he walks through the Hollywood Hills with his guests. Kevin Nealon's like just incredible comic talent. This movie, start to finish, get in your happy place. It's in the top 3 for me for funniest movies I ever saw in the theater. It was Dumb and Dumber, this one, years later, Team America World Police. Honestly, I think that this was the funniest one. I remember one of the people from our Rad panel, Scott from the Normal People panel, just dying. Never seen people laugh so hard. I've rewatched this movie. I don't even know how many times I've watched this movie so many goddamn times. It's so funny. Yeah, and to see Bob Barker and Adam Sandler throw down in a fight was just so unexpected and so just out of left field that It just had everybody laughing. Next up, directed by Christopher Guest, starring Christopher Guest and Eugene Levy, the movie is Waiting for Guffman from 1996. It's about a small town where they're awaiting Guffman, this like theater production to take place. It's just that really funny, like best of show Eugene Levy, Christopher Guest type of humor. And the final finalist for 1996 is directed by Mike Nichols, starring Nathan Lane and Robin Williams in The Birdcage. This one also finished very high on the Discord and Normal People panel. It finishes a finalist for 1996. Do you remember this one, Carol?
Oh yeah, this was a big deal because it's still a little bit taboo back in 1996. A little bit of cross-dressing in this movie, and it was a good movie. I like this movie.
Yeah, Nathan Lane too. Excellent. Him and Robin worked together a few times, and he worked well obviously on Mrs. Doubtfire as well. Nathan Lane played his brother. The winner for Raddest Comedy of 1996 goes to Happy Gilmore. Hilarious comedy. Once again, Carl Weathers, rest in peace, Chubbs Peterson. The runner-up for Funniest Comedy of 1996 goes to the Farrelly Brothers' Kingpin. And both of these movies are start to finish, laugh out loud, hilarious. They're both rated R. Next category is Raddest Comedy 1997. First off, going with Roger Nygaard's Trekkies. It's a documentary about Trekkies. I thought it was a mockumentary for the longest time. It's just so jaw-dropping how serious these people are. The dentist people, the lady that wears her gear to court, the guy who creates extra scenes for Star Trek. I never got into Star Trek, but I thought it was kind of cool after watching this show, and I watched the show many times. Love this one, Trekkies. Next up, my third favorite in the series goes to Vegas Vacation. National Lampoons, Chevy Chase, Beverly D'Angelo, the kids. I like Nick Papagiorgio. I love Chevy Chase. This is one of his last big movies, Vegas Vacation. Up next, directed by Jay Roach, starring Elizabeth Hurley and Mike Myers. The movie is Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery. I remember going to this movie with my mom. My mom was pretty straight-laced. I remember a lot of eye rolling going on. It's about Austin Powers, this guy who's frozen. He's got to come back and kill Dr. Evil, both of which played by Mike Myers. Mike Myers back in a new series, and it's after Wayne's World is done now. That's wrapped up. On to the next massive thing. Who throws a shoe? Honestly. Peter Cattaneo directs the next finalist for Raddest Comedy of 1997, The Full Monty. Mark Addy, Robert Carlyle, movie about a bunch of dudes who decide they're going to do a Chippendale act. Full Monty, international smash. I believe in miracles. Up next, directed by Paul Verhoeven, Starship Troopers, a satire science fiction movie. It's super entertaining. Really good movie, kind of similar to Mars Attacks from the year previous. Directed by George Armitage, starring Minnie Driver and John Cusack. The movie is Grosse Point Blank. It's a movie where a hitman is having an existential crisis and is invited back to his high school reunion. It's weird. It's a one-off. It's a kind of oddly entertaining movie. Grosse Point Blank. I recommend it. Up next, Raddest Comedy 1994 finalist goes to Boogie Nights, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. This is his debut. This is his second movie. Starring Julianne Moore and Mark Wahlberg, William H. Macy, Philip Seymour Hoffman, John C. Reilly. Boogie Nights is a monumental, incredible movie. It's rated R. It's about the porn industry back in the 70s and 80s. It's kind of like a continuation of early 80s, 70s Martin Scorsese style film. Check out my list on Paul Thomas Anderson on this channel. Movie Edition. I'm counting down the top 5 movies from Paul Thomas Anderson. Director, writer. Paul Thomas Anderson, he wrote this movie before he got famous. He actually made it beforehand, like a smaller project. I think it was called Dirk Diggler, the smaller project. Mark Wahlberg's an incredible actor. And I mean, I remember even at this time, it was still sort of a question whether or not he could act, whether it was he was just an artist, like a singer, or whether he could do it. And he could. Up next, starring Joey Lauren Adams, Ben Affleck, directed by Kevin Smith, my boy. I even got a Oilers jersey on for you, Kev. The movie is Chasing Amy. Kevin Smith pretty much shows up every single year at this point. Kind of goated cult classic. Chasing Amy's a great movie. I love his movies. I love the way that he talks about movies within his movies, and awesome, super entertaining. I love watching anything he does, anytime he's speaking. I love the series he did where he spoke at the colleges. Chasing Amy from the mind of Kevin Smith. Next up, directed by Frank Oz, starring Joan Cusack and Kevin Kline. The movie is In and Out. Basically, it's about this teacher that's outed when his past student announces it on the Academy Awards, and he's like from a small town. Frank Oz is such a great director. In and Out. And the winner for Raddest Comedy of 1997, yeah, baby, goes to Austin Powers, International Man of Mysteries. And that's pretty much across the board is the favorite. Just great. Just a spoof on 007. Next category is Raddest Comedy. Funniest movie of the year. I just have a couple honorable mentions that didn't quite make the finals. Half Baked, Can't Hardly Wait, starring Jennifer Love Hewitt, or what was her name?
Jennifer Love Hewitt.
She was on that show, Party of Five.
Yeah, she played Amanda Beckett. Party of Five, you're right.
And the other honorable mention is Waterboy, Adam Sandler, Waterboy. Okay, the finalists are, first up, starring Ben Stiller, Matt Dillon, and Cameron Diaz. Directed by the Farrelly brothers, Bobby and Peter. The movie is There's Something About Mary.
Ben Stiller goes to the prom with this girl that's way hotter than him and has an embarrassing situation. And then he hires a private eye, Matt Dillon, to track her down, and Matt Dillon lies to him because he wants Mary too. Everybody wants Mary, and she's like way out of everyone's league. I think she dates Brett Favre. The gel in the hair, also Ben Stiller, nepo baby.
Dumb and Dumber came out, Farrelly brothers, big debut, then Kingpin, then There's Something About Mary. Everybody was satisfied when they left the theater after this one again. Next up, directed by Bob Saget, and rest in peace, and starring Artie Lang, Norm Macdonald. And the movie is Dirty Work.
And the sad thing is that they were going to do a second Dirty Work, but then Bob and Norm both died within a year of each other.
And Norm's other good friend died in the same year, which is Billy Joe Shaver, a famous country musician who also wrote Honky Tonk Heroes, Waylon Jennings' best record. Respect Artie Lang, so funny. The scenes with Don Rickles are hilarious. Revenge for Hire, Business, and just Norm's dry humor the whole way through is so funny. Next up, directed by Frank Karachi, starring Drew Barrymore and Adam Sandler. The movie is The Wedding Singer.
Julia Gulia had a kind of crappy run of it in life, and she's engaged to this guy named Glenn Gulia, and Adam Sandler's like, you're gonna marry him, be Julia Gulia? Drew Barrymore, also a nepo baby.
This movie was always on TBS, Turner Broadcasting, and stations like that, WGN, we got here in Canada. So thank you, Ted Turner, for letting me watch this movie thousands of times. This one, Shawshank Redemption. Next up, directed by Wes Anderson, starring Bill Murray and Jason Schwartzman. The movie is Rushmore.
Going to this really fancy private school on a scholarship, but he's actually a terrible student. But he's in every single club and does everything that he can, but just doesn't do well in school, unfortunately.
On this channel, I have a Wes Anderson episode. Check it out. And this movie definitely came up. Here's where I placed it. Number 3, all-time Joepinionated List. This one's my son's favorite, and at one time, it was my favorite too. From 1998, the movie is Rushmore. This is actually the school that Wes Anderson went to. I think his high school. Bill Murray, I love the scene where he jumps into the pool with the smoke in his mouth. The soundtrack, and I love Jason Schwartzman. Bill Murray. This is the first Wes Anderson movie he was in, and he's been in every single one since. Next up, directed by Joel and Ethan Coen, starring John Goodman, Jeff Bridges, Steve Buscemi, John Turturro. The movie is The Big Lebowski. Nobody fuck with the Jesus. John Turturro, first of all, yeah, I mentioned that in the episode, the Coen Brothers episode on this channel, Joepinionated, check it out. Gypsy King's version of Hotel California. John Goodman and picking on and bullying Steve Buscemi, the dude playing referee between the two of them. And he just wants to chill and hang out. And You know, he hangs with these like kind of high strung and it's kind of shy, timid guy. And there's a very human element, even though the characters are all kind of over the top. It's also, you know, quite believable. Put the cult classics, movies that are defined as cult classics, and try to rank them. Lebowski's got to be like, if not it's got to be close to number one, if not number one. Next up, directed by a former member of Monty Python, greatest comedy ensemble in the history of fucking Earth, Terry Gilliam, starring Johnny Depp and Benicio del Toro in Hunter S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Hunter S. Thompson started writing this in Rolling Stone, and I believe in 1971.
You know, just basically tripping all the way to Vegas, like doing all kinds of drugs, and it's just like a psychedelic journey type of movie. It's funny.
Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is one of my favorite books ever, period. I think it's the best translation of a book like since Clockwork Orange, or maybe Raging Bull. It's hard to pull off all these different things that are going on, or these things that he's tripping out on, or the physical. I love Wolf of Wall Street, where Leo gets all smashed on Quaaludes and drives the car around. That scene is just incredible. I mean, I think that Johnny Depp and Benicio del Toro really got the ball rolling with this movie. I love the director. I'm super biased for this. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I got to do a Terry Gilliam episode.
And I'd like to just point out that Joe has read another book besides Robert Munch.
Final Finalist, directed by Peter Weir, starring Ed Harris, Jim Carrey. I think Laura Linney plays his wife. The movie is The Truman Show.
The first reality TV show. It was called The Truman Show, and everyone watched him. It was like, and he had no idea he was in The Truman Show. He has like no free will. His life is just carefully constructed around him. And it sort of explores the impacts of social media before we even had social media, because there was no social media back in 1998.
Check out the Jim Carrey episode on this channel where I talk about The Truman Show. Raddest comedy? Haha. It's not very funny. It stars Jim Carrey, but Truman Show is definitely a rad flick. So the winner of Raddest Comedy 1998 goes to The Big Lebowski. His dudeness. Coen Brothers masterpiece, The Big Lebowski. Runner-up goes to The Wedding Singer and By a Hair. Late votes from Ox. Almost got it through, and I know that it's one of Ox's favorite movies. The next category is Raddest Comedy 1999. The finalists are a couple quick honorable mentions for Raddest Comedy, directed by Paul Weiss and Chris Weiss is American Pie. One of the funniest movies I ever saw in the theater anyways. And I was a teenager, and that was sort of a big deal. Eugene Levy in that one. Jason Biggs, Chris Klein. Also, honorable mention goes to Jay Roach's Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, the second one. Okay, first finalist from 1999, directed by Dennis Dugan, starring Joey Lauren Adams and Adam Sandler. The movie is Big Daddy.
I love how you went with Joey Lauren Adams first. I was like, whoa, what was this? And Adam Sandler, third or fourth big one after Billy Madison and Happy Gilmore, and I think Wedding Singer probably came out just before that. It was kind of like his first normal guy movie, right? Like it's still a comedy, but he was like, there was like some drama elements of it. So you got to see some early setups for when dramatic Sandler came to the table, which was really good, you know?
Big Daddy was a hit, easy to watch, still like it to this day. Jon Stewart, that's right. Next up, directed by Alexander Payne, starring Matthew Broderick and Reese Witherspoon in Election.
Yeah, I remember it was actually you that put me onto that movie. I hadn't seen it when it came out, and I remember watching it and being thoroughly entertained by it. There's things about it that bother me though, and I don't know what it is. It's just like the fucking eye thing.
Bee sting.
It just gets gradually grosser and grosser as you go on in the movie. And Reese Witherspoon, I mean, to her credit, she plays it just an insufferable character.
Tracy Flick. This one holds up. Certified rad, no doubt about it. I still laugh my ass off from start to finish this movie. Alexander Payne. I'm not really familiar with that name.
Sideways. That he directed Sideways, I believe.
Next up, directed by absolute hero of mine, Mike Judge, starring Ron Livingston and Jennifer Aniston. The movie is Office Space.
One of my favorite comedies ever. The stapler bit, the iconic scene of smashing the printers with the baseball bats. Michael Bolton, Lumbergh, We're gonna have you come in on Saturday too.
Lumberg's messages.
Case of the Mondays, Flair.
Yeah, Mike Judge, for me, Tales from the Tour Bus. It's become like one of my absolute favorite all-time docuseries is Tales from the Tour Bus, but also Mike Judge just as a human being in general. If you've ever watched interviews with this guy, absolutely love it. And the next movie directed by Trey Parker, starring Trey Parker, Matt Stone, South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut.
You know what's funny is South Park was so big, like 97, like when it was big. And then kind of drifted out of my periphery. But then one of my best buddies, a guy named Mick Wheel, shout out Mick Wheel from Bolton, England. We're on a bus in Thailand and he was like, do you watch South Park? And I was like, no, I don't watch South Park. And he showed me the royal wedding. Kate and William got married and they did the royal Canadian wedding. I was on the back of the bus and he was showing me the royal wedding. And I don't think it's ever happened in my life, fell on the fucking ground, like holding onto my stomach, laughing. These guys are geniuses and they really don't get enough credit. You look at like The Simpsons, maybe even better than The Simpsons.
I remember loving South Park when it first came out. I remember liking this movie, but even by the time this movie came out, I was sort of like fizzling out for me a little bit. Overkill on South Park for that whole year. I kind of came back around to it watching all the Christmas specials. I picture myself as like in a retirement home catching up on South Park and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia as like two top priorities for me. Next up, directed by Roger Mitchell, starring Hugh Grant and Julia Roberts. The movie is Notting Hill.
This is for comedy? Notting Hill?
Considered a rom-com, possibly?
Maybe it's considered a rom. I'm nodding, feeling that one at all.
Next up in comedy, starring Danny DeVito, Courtney Love, Jim Carrey, directed by Milos Forman, also starring Jerry the King Lawler. The movie is Man on the Moon. Paul Giamatti as well.
It's a travesty that it was shot out of so many different awards. And I mean, particularly though, Jim Carrey. And Jim Carrey's lived as Andy Kaufman. If anybody's seen that documentary, I forget what it's called. And he really just became Andy Kaufman, right? Like insufferably Andy Kaufman, but he's so good. The mannerisms completely translates over in the film. He captured everything. He won a Golden Globe actually for that, I believe. Brilliant movie. Giamatti's incredible.
This year is a tough one. It's top heavy for sure. There's some really good options for Best Picture and Best Actor and stuff like that. I'm not really like too upset with what won. The nominees I'm a bit upset about. And this movie got nominated for 0 Academy Awards. When you have Milos Forman directing a picture, it should really be in the conversation for Best Director. Jim Carrey's performance as Kaufman, ridiculous. Check out my Jim Carrey episode on this channel. Today on Joepinionated List, Movie Edition, I'm getting ready to break down the top 10 performances by the actor, Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey was born on January 17th, 1962 in Newmarket, Ontario, Canada. As a Canadian, growing up, Jim Carrey was like a hero to me. And then the other thing is, I didn't know who Andy Kaufman was before this movie came out. I talked about this in the Jim Carrey episode, but when I was younger, Taxi was one of the shows that we got. We didn't have cable when I was really young, and I lived in a trailer park in Edmonton, Alberta. We had 3 channels. Taxi was one of the shows that came on. All I thought about when I saw Taxi was Tony Danza, there's the guy from Who's the Boss, and Christopher Lloyd, there's the guy from Back to the Future. Since the days of YouTube, I've watched countless Andy Kaufman stuff on Letterman, especially SNL. The guy is a genius and so funny. And when he's on Letterman, every single one of those is just like the funniest thing ever. The Great Divide from REM was a single on the soundtrack. So Man on the Moon was a song that they had released in 92, but REM's top charting song in Europe or in England. Next up, directed by Spike Jonze, written by Charlie Kaufman, starring John Cusack and Cameron Diaz and John Malkovich. The movie is Being John Malkovich.
Insane. Malkovich. It's incredible, insane movie. I read something where Cusack was doing a lot. He was big at this point, and he basically was like, I want you to send me the craziest, most unproducible script possible, and I want to do that. Charlie Kaufman who ended up doing, Eternal Sunshine and Adaptation and Synecdoche, New York. Incredible writer. And then you have John Cusack, who like the slubby kind of loser character. What a fucking movie. What a great movie.
I recently went to Jersey, so I got to drive down the Jersey Turnpike. And every single time I saw the sign, I thought of this movie. Written by Charlie Kaufman. This is definitely one of the movies you and I first gelled on back in the day. Directed by Spike Jonze. And another cool fact is that's Kaufman and Jones's film debut was this movie. I watched something Malkovich talking about them bringing him the script and saying it's got to be you, and he thought it was a great script. He wanted it to be somebody else. No, it's got to be somebody else inside of somebody else's head. And then he finally agreed to it. The 7.5 floor. I remember watching the first time I watched it. There is the whole puppet part at the start, and then it goes into the office scene where he gets off at the 7.5 floor and being hooked. I've never seen anything like that. And so that's writer Charlie Kaufman and his genius, and we're huge Charlie Kaufman fans. Cameron Diaz, let's not forget. I never remember that Cameron Diaz is in this movie. The makeup and the character is so incredible that you would not know. You go to this portal into Malkovich's mind for 15 minutes, and then you get dumped out on the side of the Jersey Turnpike.
Catherine Keener, I think, is like one of the more underrated actresses ever. Recently in Get Out, 40-Year-Old Virgin. Like Catherine Keener is always excellent.
Last, but certainly not least, directed by Adam Rifkin, starring Edward Furlong, Giuseppe Andrews. The movie is Detroit Rock City. This movie isn't really about Kiss. It's called Detroit Rock City. It's loosely based around getting to a Kiss concert, but it's a stoner comedy, not a Linklater movie, but it's an attempt at being a Linklater movie. And I love Ed Furlong. And the winner of Raddest Comedy of 1999 goes to Office Space, directed by Mike Judge. Hilarious. I forgot about the scene at the start with the cars. Playing his gangster rap. Was he playing Ghetto Boys? Or Ghetto Boys was playing later? Oh, it was Ice Cube. Today is a good day. Sorry, Jesse, the runner-up for Raddest Comedy of 1999 goes to Election. That's a wrap on Rad Flicks 1999, and the 90s are over. I'm going to do a couple roundup 80s and 90s episodes. I'm going to jump into the 2000s. I want to say thank you to the Normal People panel, especially Jesse for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I love talking movies. We don't get to do this. Let's talk movies more. Except for 2000. Terrible year in movies.
A reminder to like, comment, subscribe, all that shit below. Share it. Let us know what your picks would be in each category. I'm sorry, I'm a little low on facts and high on opinions.